Hashtag the hook in the vast expanse of the Galactic Coalition, where 1,000 species bend the knee to the mighty Zephyrian Empire. One truth has remained absolute for 3 centuries. Humans are nothing more than primitive backwater creatures, barely worthy of serving as laborers on the Outer Rim worlds. Their small stature, fragile bones, and laughably short lifespans have made them the subject of endless ridicule across every civilized planet. But what happens when the galaxy's most arrogant princess encounters a human soldier who carries secrets that could reshape the very foundations of interstellar power? What happens when the creature she spent her entire life mocking turns out to be the only thing standing between her people and total annihilation? Princess Kythera of House Valendros has built her reputation on her razor-sharp wit and her particular talent for humiliating the lesser species that serve in her mother's empire. She's never met a human who could last more than 5 minutes under her verbal assault. But when a quiet human soldier named Marcus Chun arrives as part of a diplomatic escort, something feels different. He doesn't cower. He doesn't flinch. He simply watches her with eyes that seem to hold the weight of stars. Little does she know that this unremarkable human carries within him the legacy of a species that has survived ice ages, world wars, plagues, and the destruction of their own homeworld. Little does she know that his kind has spent the last 50 years preparing for a war that no one else in the galaxy even knows is coming. And when the day arrives that an ancient enemy returns to claim what they believe is rightfully theirs, every proud empire, every mighty fleet, every advanced civilization will discover a terrifying truth. Sometimes the strongest steel is forged in the deepest fires, and sometimes the greatest warriors come from the most unlikely places. This is the story of the day the galaxy learned to fear the humans. This is the story of how a mocking princess became a grateful daughter. This is the story of how Earth's children finally came home. The crystalline spires of Zephyros Prime gleamed like frozen lightning against the violet sky, their surfaces reflecting the twin suns that had watched over the Zephyrian Empire for 10,000 years. Within the highest tower of the Imperial Palace, Princess Kythera of House Valendros stood before a wall of pure starlight, watching as 3 diplomatic shuttles descended toward the landing platforms far below. Her reflection in the transparent aluminum showed a figure that embodied everything the galaxy considered perfect. 8 feet of elegant height, skin like polished silver, eyes that shifted from deep purple to brilliant gold, depending on her mood, and the characteristic bone crest that marked her as royalty among her people. At 147 years old, she was barely considered an adult by Zephyrian standards, but her intellect and cruelty had already become legendary throughout the outer systems. "Your Highness," came the melodic voice of her personal aide, a nervous centauri named Velis, whose 4 arms constantly fidgeted with the data tablets she carried. "The diplomatic convoy has arrived. Representatives from the Mining Guild, the Merchant Alliance, and—" She paused, her voice dropping with obvious distaste, "the Terran Colonial Authority." Kythera's lips curved into a smile that would have made a predator proud. "Ah yes, the humans. Tell me, Velis, how many of their little envoys have we received this cycle?" 37, Your Highness. Most seeking trade agreements or colonial charters. "And how many have left with their dignity intact?" Velis's skin shifted to a pale blue, the Centauri equivalent of embarrassment. "None, Your Highness. Though I should mention that this delegation appears different." "Different how?" Kythera turned from the window, her golden eyes focusing with predatory interest. "The escort includes military personnel, and their leader is requesting a formal audience with Her Imperial Majesty." Kythera laughed, a sound like crystal bells mixed with the promise of winter storms. "Military personnel? How wonderfully amusing. I wasn't aware the humans had progressed beyond throwing rocks at each other." She gestured toward the ornate doors of her chambers. "Have them brought to the lesser audience chamber. I think I'm in the mood for entertainment." The lesser audience chamber was designed for exactly this purpose, to make visiting dignitaries feel appropriately small and insignificant. The ceiling soared 300 feet overhead, supported by pillars carved from single pieces of Andromedian marble. The floor was a mirror-smooth expanse of dark crystal that reflected everything while somehow making the reflections seem distorted and wrong. At the far end, raised on a dais that required climbing 50 steps to reach, sat the throne where visiting royalty was expected to receive lesser beings. Kithara had chosen not to sit on the throne today. Instead, she stood at the center of the chamber, positioned so that anyone entering would have to walk the full length of the intimidating space to reach her. She wore robes of deep crimson silk that flowed like liquid fire, and her bone crests had been polished to mirror brightness. Every detail of her appearance was calculated to reinforce the vast gulf between herself and whatever primitive creatures dared to seek audience with the Empire. The massive doors opened with a sound like distant thunder, and the diplomatic party entered. First came the mining guild representatives, a collection of various species, all trying to look important while clearly being overwhelmed by their surroundings. Behind them walked the Merchant Alliance envoys, their attention already calculating the value of everything they saw. And finally, almost as an afterthought, came the humans. There were 6 of them, and Kithara had to suppress a laugh at how pathetically small they looked. The tallest among them barely reached 6.5 feet, making them look like children who had wandered into an adult gathering. Their skin was that unhealthy pink-brown color that marked them as one of the newer species, and their features were blunt and primitive compared to the elegant bone structures of the older races. 5 of them wore the simple gray uniforms that marked them as diplomatic personnel. But the 6th was different. He wore what appeared to be a military dress uniform of deep blue, with insignia that Kithara didn't recognize. Unlike his companions, who kept glancing around nervously at the grandeur surrounding them, this one kept his eyes fixed straight ahead. Even more unusual, he seemed completely unimpressed by everything he saw. The diplomatic procession came to a halt at the traditional distance, and the various representatives began the complex ritual of greetings and introductions that interstellar protocol demanded. Kithara barely listened, her attention focused on a human soldier who stood silently at the back of the group. There was something about him that irritated her, though she couldn't quite identify what it was. And finally, the lead human diplomat was saying, "I present Sergeant Marcus Chun, military liaison from the Terran Defense Corps." The soldier stepped forward and executed what Kithara assumed was meant to be a bow, though it was nowhere near deep enough to show proper respect. When he straightened, his eyes met hers directly, which was either ignorance of protocol or deliberate insult. "Your Highness," he said simply, his voice carrying an accent she didn't recognize. "How fascinating," Kithara said, her voice pitched to carry clearly through the vast chamber. "A human soldier. Tell me, Sergeant Shun, what exactly does your species call military service? I'm quite curious, since we've never observed you successfully defending anything." A ripple of nervous laughter came from the other diplomats, but Marcus Chin's expression didn't change. "We call it duty, Your Highness." "Duty." Kithara savored the word as if it were something amusing. "And what glorious victories can you tell us about? What mighty foes has humanity defeated? What worlds have you conquered?" "We've conquered ourselves, Your Highness." That seemed like enough for now. The answer caught Kithara off guard. She had expected stammering explanations or defensive boasting, but the human's calm response was somehow more infuriating than either would have been. She decided to escalate. "Conquered yourselves? How very humble. Though I suppose when you're barely 5 feet tall and break bones like dry twigs, conquest of any kind is impressive." The comment drew more laughter from the assembled diplomats. "Tell me, Sergeant, how does it feel to be part of a species so weak that you can't even survive on most civilized worlds without artificial assistance?" "It feels like being human, Your Highness." "And what exactly does that mean?" For the first time, something flickered in Marcus Chen's eyes. Not anger, exactly, but something that made Kithara suddenly feel like she was being evaluated by a predator deciding whether she was worth the effort of hunting. "It means we've learned that strength isn't just about size or how long you live," he said quietly. "It means we've discovered that the most important battles aren't always the ones fought with weapons." How very philosophical and utterly meaningless. Kithara began to pace around the human soldier, noting how he tracked her movement without turning his head. "Let me explain something to you, little human. In the 300 years since your species crawled out of your gravity well, you've accomplished exactly nothing of significance. You mine asteroids that we allow you to mine. You settle worlds that we permit you to settle. You exist because we tolerate your existence. That's one way to look at it. Marcus Chun agreed. It's the only way to look at it. Your species is a curiosity at best, a minor irritation at worst. You have no great achievements, no mighty works, no legacy that will outlast your brief lives. You are in every measurable way completely insignificant. The chamber had fallen silent. Even the other diplomats seemed uncomfortable with the cruelty of Kithra's words, but none dared to intervene. The princess was working herself into the kind of verbal assault that had reduced visiting dignitaries to tears and ended diplomatic careers. Your homeworld is a backwater rock that barely qualified for membership in the galactic community. Your technology is primitive copies of things we invented millennia ago. Your culture is a collection of tribal squabbles and primitive superstitions. Your people are short-lived mayflies who accomplish nothing before you die. She stopped directly in front of Marcus Chun, looking down at him from her considerable height advantage. So tell me, Sergeant, what possible reason could we have for treating you as anything other than the pathetic, weak, insignificant creatures that you obviously are? Marcus Chun was quiet for so long that Kithra began to wonder if she had finally broken through his irritating calm. When he spoke, his voice was so soft that the chamber's acoustics barely carried it to the other listeners. Your Highness, may I tell you a story? The question was so unexpected that Kithra actually took a step back. A story? It's about my grandfather. He fought in something we called the Water Wars, back on Earth about 70 years ago. The planet was dying from climate change and pollution, and different groups were fighting over the last clean water sources. Marcus Chin's eyes never left hers as he spoke. My grandfather was part of a unit that held a position called Fire-Based Charity for 16 days against odds that our computers said were mathematically impossible to survive. How very inspiring, Kithra said, though she found herself listening despite her intention to dismiss whatever he was saying. 16 days, Your Highness. No resupply, no reinforcements, no hope of rescue. Just 12 men and women standing between a civilian population and people who wanted to take their water. By the end, they were down to 4 soldiers. My grandfather was wounded so badly that he couldn't walk, but he kept fighting. And I suppose this is meant to impress me? No, Your Highness. It's meant to explain something. Marcus Chin's voice remained calm, but something in his eyes had changed. See, the thing about humans is that we don't fight because we're strong. We fight because we have to. And when we have to, we don't stop. How very dramatic and completely irrelevant. Maybe, but there's something else you should know about humans, Your Highness. Something that all the intelligence reports and cultural analyses might not have mentioned. And what would that be? Marcus Chun smiled, and for the first time since entering the chamber, he looked genuinely amused. We remember everything. Every slight, every insult, every time someone told us we were weak or insignificant or pathetic. We remember it all, and we never, ever forget. Something cold touched Kithra's spine, though she couldn't say why. Are you threatening me, human? No, Your Highness. I'm just answering your question. He paused, and when he continued, there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before. Something that made the vast chamber suddenly feel smaller. You asked what possible reason you could have for treating us as anything other than pathetic, weak, insignificant creatures. The answer is simple, because someday you might need us. Need you? Kithra laughed, but the sound echoed strangely in the crystal chamber. For what possible purpose would the Zephyrian Empire need humanity? I don't know, Your Highness. But if that day ever comes, you'll want us to remember this conversation differently than we do right now. The silence that followed stretched until it became uncomfortable. Kithra found herself staring into the human's eyes, looking for some sign of the fear or submission she was accustomed to inspiring. Instead, she saw something she had never encountered before, absolute certainty that he was right. You're dismissed, she said finally, her voice sharper than she had intended. All of you. The diplomatic party began the formal process of withdrawal, bowing and backing away according to protocol. But as Marcus Chun reached the great doors, he turned back for one final moment. Your Highness, he called across the vast space between them. When you write your report about this meeting, you might want to include one additional detail. And what would that be? The Terran Defense Corps wasn't actually invited to this diplomatic mission. We assigned ourselves to escort duty. His smile was neither friendly nor unfriendly, just matter of fact. We thought it was time someone from Earth got a look at the heart of the Empire. Then, he was gone, leaving Kithara alone in the crystalline chamber with the sudden, inexplicable feeling that something important had just happened. Something she didn't understand yet, but would very soon. Outside, in the corridors leading away from the audience chamber, Marcus Chun walked steadily beside his diplomatic colleagues. His expression was calm and professional, giving no hint of the communication device hidden in his ear or the coded transmission he was receiving. Phoenix Base to Sparrow 1 came the encrypted signal. Report status. Sparrow 1 to Phoenix Base. Marcus subvocalized, the words picked up by the nearly invisible throat microphone. Target assessment complete. The princess is exactly as described in the psychological profile. Copy that, Sparrow 1. Timeline. Marcus glanced at the ornate chronometer on the wall, its alien symbols automatically translated by his enhanced vision systems. Estimate 72 hours until first contact, Phoenix Base. Maybe less. Understood. Maintain position and continue observation. Remember, Sparrow 1, they need to see us as we really are before the shooting starts. Copy that, Phoenix Base. Chin out. As the human delegation continued toward their assigned quarters, none of the Zephyrian guards or servants paid them any particular attention. After all, they were just humans. Short-lived, insignificant, completely harmless humans. In exactly 68 hours, that assessment would prove to be the most catastrophic intelligence failure in galactic history. Princess Kithara stood in her private chambers, staring at the holographic display that floated above her ornate desk. The data streams flowing across the projection should have been routine diplomatic intelligence, the kind of background information that protocol demanded before any formal negotiations. Instead, what she was seeing made no sense whatsoever. Velis, she called to her aide, who was organizing files in the adjoining office. Come here and explain this to me. The Centauri approached cautiously, her forearms clutching data tablets against her chest like protective armor. What seems to be the problem, Your Highness? This human, Marcus Chun, according to the diplomatic roster, he's a sergeant in something called the Terran Defense Corps. But look at these service records. Kithara gestured at the hologram, where rows of text scrolled past in the distinctive blue glow of official documentation. It says he served for 23 years. How is that possible? Humans barely live 40 standard years. Velis's skin shifted to the pale green that indicated confusion. Perhaps there's an error in the translation protocols, Your Highness? Sometimes the conversion between Terran and Galactic Standard creates inconsistencies. No, I've checked that. The numbers are accurate. This human has supposedly been in military service longer than most of them live. Kithara expanded the display, bringing up additional files. And look at this posting history. He served on 14 different worlds, including 3 that are listed as completely uninhabitable for human physiology. Perhaps they use artificial life support extensively? For 23 years? That would be economically impossible for a species as primitive as the humans. Kithara frowned at the display, her bone crests shifting from their normal silver to deep purple, a sign of intense concentration. There's something else. According to this file, he's not from Earth. Not from Earth? But I thought all humans were from Earth. Apparently not. His birth record lists something called New Aberdeen, Kepler 442b. But when I cross-reference that with our stellar cartography, Kepler 442b was destroyed in a stellar collapse 47 years ago. Velis made a sound that was the Centauri equivalent of a nervous gulp. Your Highness, perhaps we should inform Imperial Intelligence? If there are discrepancies in the diplomatic credentials. No. Kithara's voice was sharp enough to make her aide step back. Not yet. I want to understand what I'm looking at first. She manipulated the hologram again, bringing up a new section of data. Look at this. The human delegation requested quarters in the old wing, Section 7. Do you know what Section 7 is? Storage areas, Your Highness? I believe they're mostly unused. They're unused because they're adjacent to the primary sensor array. Anyone staying there would have access to detailed readings of everything happening in the system. Kithara's eyes had shifted from purple to the bright gold that indicated either extreme interest or extreme danger. Either these humans are incredibly lucky, or They're much more clever than we've given them credit for. What do you intend to do, Your Highness? Kythera stood, her crimson robes flowing around her like liquid fire. I intend to pay a visit to our human guests. Informally, of course. The journey through the palace's older sections took Kythera through corridors she hadn't visited in years. The architecture here was different from the main palace, less focused on overwhelming visitors and more on functionality. The walls were lined with data conduits and sensor nodes, the nervous system of a structure that had served as the Empire's capital for over 8,000 years. As she approached Section 7, she became aware of something unexpected: voices. Human voices, speaking in their primitive language, but somehow her universal translator was having difficulty processing what they were saying. The words came through clearly enough, but the context seemed to shift and flow in ways that didn't make sense. Confirmed 3 heavy cruiser groups in high orbit, with what looks like a battle line formation at the Lagrange point, one voice was saying. Definitely not standard defensive positioning. Any word from Phoenix Base on the timeline? This was Marcus Chen's voice, though it sounded different than it had in the throne room. More focused, more professional. Negative. But the sensor readings are consistent with what we expected. They're definitely running standard Zephyrian defensive protocols, nothing adapted for what's coming. Kythera pressed herself against the wall next to the open doorway, her royal dignity forgotten in favor of intelligence gathering. What she heard next made her question everything she thought she knew about humanity. Intel was right about the princess, Marcus Chen continued. Classic aristocratic overconfidence, complete with the standard superiority complex. She'll be easy enough to manage when the time comes. Think she'll cooperate? She'll have to. The psychological profile suggests she's pragmatic underneath all the arrogance. When she realizes what's at stake, she'll do what needs to be done. And if she doesn't, there was a pause that somehow managed to be more frightening than any threat. Then, we implement Protocol 7. Jesus Marcus. Protocol 7? For a diplomatic mission. This stopped being a diplomatic mission the moment we detected the Devourer's advanced scouts 3 months ago. Kythera's blood turned to ice. The Devourers were a nightmare from the early days of galactic civilization, a species that had appeared from the void between galaxies and consumed 17 worlds before mysteriously vanishing back into the darkness. That had been over 2,000 years ago, and they had passed into legend. How much do you think she knows? Another voice asked. About the Devourers? Nothing. About us? Less than nothing. As far as she's concerned, we're exactly what we appear to be. Primitive little creatures who exist at her sufferance. Marcus Chen's voice carried something that might have been amusement. It's amazing how much people will ignore when it doesn't fit their preconceptions. The stealth tech is holding perfectly. The biomodulators are keeping us within normal human parameters for their sensors. As far as anyone can tell, we're exactly as weak and short-lived as we're supposed to be. Kythera found herself gripping the wall for support. Biomodulators. Stealth technology? What exactly were these humans? Status report on the orbital platforms. 12 stations, all armed with what looks like 4th-generation plasma cannons. Effective against conventional threats, but they'll be useless against Devourer bioships. There was the sound of equipment being adjusted. The real problem is going to be the civilian population. 8 billion Zephyrians on the planet. Another 2 billion in the orbital habitats. We can't evacuate that many people in the time we have. We're not here to evacuate anyone. We're here to make sure they can defend themselves. With respect, Marcus, have you looked at their military doctrine? It's all about massive ships firing at long range. They've never faced anything like what the Devourers can do. No, but they're going to learn, whether they want to or not. Kythera had heard enough. She backed away from the doorway, her mind racing with implications she wasn't ready to accept. The humans weren't what they appeared to be. They had knowledge of threats that the Empire's best intelligence services had missed. And somehow, they were planning to use her as part of whatever scheme they were implementing. She made her way back through the corridors in a state of shock, barely acknowledging the guards who bowed as she passed. Everything she thought she knew about humanity had just been turned upside down. They weren't primitive. They weren't weak. And they definitely weren't as insignificant as she had believed. Back in her chambers, she activated her private communication array and sent an encrypted message to Imperial intelligence. Within minutes, she was connected to Admiral Thane Corvex, the Empire's chief intelligence officer, and one of the few people who had the authority to question her actions. Your Highness, Admiral Korvex's holographic image materialized above her desk, his scarred features showing the weariness of someone who had seen too much in his 400 years of service. This is an unusual time for a consultation. Admiral, I need everything we have on humanity. Everything. Not just the standard diplomatic profiles, but deep intelligence. Military capabilities, technological assessments, historical analysis. Korvex's expression shifted subtly. May I ask why, Your Highness? Because I think we may have made a serious error in our evaluation of them. What kind of error? Kithra hesitated. How could she explain that she had been eavesdropping on a diplomatic delegation and overheard them discussing military intelligence that the Empire didn't possess? Let's just say that their behavior isn't consistent with their supposed capabilities. Admiral Korvex was quiet for several seconds, his eyes focused on something beyond the holographic transmission. Your Highness, there are certain classified files regarding humanity that are restricted to the highest levels of the Imperial government. I would need authorization from Her Imperial Majesty to release them. Then get it. Your Highness, it's the middle of the night. The Empress is Admiral. Kithra's voice carried all the authority of her bloodline. Contact my mother. Tell her that I believe we may be facing an immediate threat to Imperial security and that the human delegation may be involved. Tell her that I need access to everything we know about their species, and I need it now. Admiral Korvex studied her face for several long moments, his expression growing more concerned. Your Highness, if you suspect that the humans represent a direct threat to the Empire, perhaps we should consider detaining them for questioning? No, not yet. If I'm right about what I overheard, then detaining them might be the worst possible thing we could do. Kithra moved to the window, looking out at the orbital platforms that the humans had been discussing so casually. Admiral, in your professional opinion, what would be the result if someone launched a coordinated attack on our primary defensive installations? With current technology, it would be impossible. Our shields and weapon systems are the most advanced in the galaxy. What if the attackers had technology we've never encountered before? Technology specifically designed to counter our defenses. Admiral Korvex's image flickered as he adjusted his own transmission settings. Your Highness, are you suggesting that humanity has developed weapons capable of threatening the Empire? I'm suggesting that maybe humanity isn't what we think it is. Maybe it never was. The Admiral was quiet for nearly a minute. When he spoke again, his voice was careful and precise. I'll contact Her Imperial Majesty immediately. In the meantime, I'm authorizing increased security around the human delegation. Discreet surveillance only, nothing that would violate diplomatic protocol. Good. And, Admiral, when you brief my mother, make sure she understands that this may be urgent. I have a feeling that time is not on our side. After the connection ended, Kithra stood alone in her chambers, staring out at the stars that had watched over the Zephyrian Empire for millennia. Somewhere out there, if the humans were to be believed, an ancient enemy was returning. An enemy that had consumed worlds and disappeared back into the darkness between galaxies. And the only warning they had received had come from a species they had dismissed as primitive and insignificant. She thought about Marcus Chen's words in the throne room. Someday, you might need us. At the time, she had found the suggestion ridiculous. Now, she was beginning to wonder if the human had been trying to tell her something she wasn't ready to hear. Her communication array chimed with an incoming priority message. The holographic seal of the Imperial throne appeared above her desk, indicating that her mother was ready to speak with her. But before she could accept the connection, another sound caught her attention. From somewhere deep within the palace, barely audible through the massive stone walls, came the sound of emergency alarms. Kithra rushed to her window and looked up at the orbital defense platforms. Instead of their usual steady glow, they were flashing in the rapid pattern that indicated high alert. As she watched, more lights began to appear in the darkness between the platforms, moving in formations that her trained eye recognized as patrol sweeps. Something was out there. Her communication array chimed again, this time with the urgent tone that indicated an empire-wide emergency broadcast. She accepted the connection, and her mother's face appeared above the desk, no longer showing the regal composure that marked official communications. Kithra Empress Valderus said, her voice tense with barely controlled urgency. We have a situation. Long-range sensors have detected massive energy signatures moving toward our system. 12 contact groups, moving at speeds that should be impossible. Mother, the humans, I know about the humans. Admiral Corvex briefed me on your concerns. The Empress paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a note that Kythera had never heard before: uncertainty. Kythera, the energy signatures match records from the Imperial Archives. Records that are over 2,000 years old. The Devourers? We think so. And if the historical accounts are accurate, we have perhaps 72 hours before they reach this system. Empress Valderus looked directly at her daughter through the holographic connection. I'm ordering you to meet with the human delegation immediately. If they know something about this threat, we need to know it too. Yes, Mother. And Kythera? If it turns out that humanity has been concealing their true capabilities from us, we're going to need to reassess everything. Everything we thought we knew about them. Everything we thought we knew about the balance of power in the galaxy. The connection ended, leaving Kythera alone with the realization that the galaxy was about to change in ways none of them were prepared for. Outside her window, the orbital platforms continued their urgent flashing, while in the distance, barely visible against the starfield, she could see the running lights of ships moving into defensive positions. Somewhere in the palace, Marcus Chun and his companions were probably still discussing their mysterious protocols and their knowledge of ancient enemies. In a few minutes, she would have to go to them and admit that the Zephyrian Empire needed help from a species they had spent 3 centuries looking down upon. The irony would have been amusing if the circumstances weren't so terrifying. As she prepared to leave her chambers, one final thought occurred to her. Marcus Chun had said that humans never forgot anything. Every slight, every insult, every time someone told them they were weak or insignificant. In a few hours, she was going to find out whether that was a threat or a promise. The emergency lighting in the palace corridors cast everything in harsh red shadows as Princess Kythera made her way toward the human delegation's quarters. The familiar halls had been transformed into something alien and threatening, with security teams moving through the passages and the constant low hum of activated defense systems creating an atmosphere of barely controlled panic. She had traded her ceremonial robes for practical military attire, a decision that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. The silver and black uniform of the Imperial Guard felt strange against her skin, but she suspected that ceremony and protocol were about to become irrelevant luxuries. As she approached Section 7, she could hear voices again, but this time they weren't speaking quietly. The humans were conducting what sounded like a full military briefing, their voices clear and professional in a way that made her earlier assessment of them seem laughably naive. Estimate 47 hours until the advanced scouts reach optimal scanning range, someone was saying as she arrived at the open doorway. Main battle groups, approximately 60 hours behind that. Time enough if we move fast. This was Marcus Chen's voice, but now she could hear the authority in it that she had somehow missed during their first encounter. What's the status on Imperial fleet positioning? Textbook defensive formation, but completely wrong for what they're about to face. They're preparing for conventional warfare against an enemy that doesn't follow conventional rules. Kythera stepped into the doorway and found herself looking at a scene that challenged everything she thought she knew about human technology. The humans had transformed their simple guest quarters into what appeared to be a sophisticated command center. Holographic displays showed tactical information that was far more detailed than anything the Empire's own systems could provide, and equipment that definitely hadn't been in their luggage when they arrived was operating with quiet efficiency. 6 humans were working at various stations, and every one of them had undergone a transformation that made her question whether they were the same species she had met that afternoon. They were taller, their movements more fluid and precise, and there was something about their bearing that spoke of competence and experience on a scale that didn't match their supposed primitiveness. Marcus Chun looked up from a tactical display and saw her standing in the doorway. Your Highness, I was wondering when you'd decide to visit us. You were expecting me? We've been monitoring Imperial communications since the alert started. Given the psychological profile we developed for you, it was inevitable that you'd want answers. He gestured toward a chair that someone had positioned where she could see the main displays. Please sit down. We have a great deal to discuss, and not much time to do it. I want to know what you are, Kithara said, making no move toward the offered chair. I want to know what humanity really is. That's a fair question, though the answer might be more complicated than you're prepared for. Marcus Chun touched something on his console, and the holographic displays shifted to show what appeared to be a star map. Tell me, Your Highness, what do you know about human history? You're a young species that developed interstellar travel about 300 years ago. You've established colonies on 14 worlds and achieved a basic level of technological sophistication. Your homeworld is a Class M planet called Earth, located in what you call the Sol system. All of that is true, as far as it goes. But it's not the whole story. The star map zoomed in to show a particular region of space. This is where humanity actually comes from, or rather, where we came from originally. Kithara found herself staring at a section of the galaxy that was marked as uninhabited wasteland. According to Imperial stellar cartography, the entire region had been scoured clean by some ancient catastrophe, leaving behind nothing but dead systems and the debris of destroyed worlds. That's impossible. Nothing has lived in the scorched sector for over 3,000 years. Nothing lives there now. But 3,000 years ago, it was home to a thriving confederation of human worlds. 87 inhabited systems, with a combined population of over 200 billion people. Marcus Chin's voice was matter-of-fact, but something in his expression suggested deeper currents. We called it the First Commonwealth. You're telling me that humanity is older than our records indicate. Much older, and much more experienced than anyone in the galaxy realizes. Another human, a woman whose uniform bore insignia that Kithara was beginning to suspect indicated very high rank, stepped forward. Your Highness, I'm Admiral Sarah Reeves, Terran Defense Corps. What we're about to tell you is classified at the highest levels of human government. Until now, only a handful of people outside our species have ever learned the truth. What truth? Admiral Reeves manipulated the holographic display, bringing up images that made Kithara's breath catch. Ships the size of moons, their biomechanical surfaces covered with what looked like organic armor. Weapons that seemed to grow from the hulls like cancerous tumors. And everywhere, the distinctive energy signatures that the Empire's archives identified as belonging to the Devourers. 3,000 years ago, humanity's first great civilization encountered the Devourers during their initial expansion into the galaxy. It was supposed to be our golden age, the period when we would take our place among the great starfaring species. Admiral Reeves paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the weight of inherited grief. Instead, it became our first great apocalypse. The Devourers consumed your civilization. They tried. They succeeded in destroying most of it, but not all. Marcus Chun activated another display, this one showing schematic diagrams of ships that looked nothing like the primitive human vessels in the Imperial databases. The thing about humans, Your Highness, is that we learn from our mistakes, and we never make the same mistake twice. I don't understand. The survivors of the First Commonwealth spent the next 500 years preparing for the Devourer's return. They developed new technologies, new strategies, new ways of thinking about warfare. And when the Devourers came back, expecting to finish what they had started, they found a very different enemy waiting for them. The holographic display shifted again, showing what appeared to be a massive battle in the depths of space. The biomechanical ships of the Devourers were engaging human vessels that seemed impossibly small by comparison, but the battle was clearly going in humanity's favor. We drove them back, Admiral Reeves continued. Not just defeated them, but broke their expansion completely. They retreated to the void between galaxies, and we thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't. No, because driving them back wasn't enough. We realized that they would eventually return, probably when the galaxy had forgotten about them completely. So we made a decision that has shaped human policy for the last 2,000 years. Marcus Chun looked directly at her, his expression serious. We decided to make sure the galaxy would be ready for them when they came back. Kithara felt something cold settle in her stomach. Ready how? By ensuring that all the major species developed the technology and military capabilities necessary to defend themselves. By carefully guiding galactic development along lines that would produce effective resistance to Devourer tactics. and by placing ourselves in position to coordinate that defense when the time came. You're saying that humanity has been manipulating galactic civilization for 2,000 years. Not manipulating, shepherding. Admiral Reeves pulled up another set of displays, these showing technological development timelines for dozens of species. Every major advancement in defensive technology, every improvement in weapons systems, every development in shield generators and hull armor, we've either directly contributed to or carefully guided from behind the scenes. The plasma cannon technology that your orbital platforms use, we invented it and made sure the specifications found their way to the Zephyrian research facilities. The shield generators that protect your major worlds, based on principles we developed and shared through carefully orchestrated technology transfers. Marcus Chun gestured at the displays. For 2 millennia, we've been preparing this galaxy for war, and no one has ever realized it. Kithara sat down heavily in the offered chair, her mind reeling with the implications. You've been pretending to be primitive. We've been pretending to be exactly what we needed to be. Weak enough that no one would see us as a threat, advanced enough that we could maintain our cover, and positioned carefully enough that we could influence events when necessary. But why? Why go through this elaborate charade? Because the alternative was worse. Admiral Reeves activated a new display, this one showing population statistics for the major galactic species. 3,000 years ago, when the Devourers first appeared, there were less than 50 sentient species in the galaxy. They consumed 17 worlds before we stopped them. Today, there are over 800 species, with a combined population of over 12 trillion beings. If we had revealed our true capabilities and taken direct control of galactic development, we might have been more efficient. But we also would have stifled the natural development of other species. We would have created a galaxy full of dependent client states instead of strong, independent civilizations. Marcus Chun moved to stand beside Kithara's chair, his expression sympathetic. Your Highness, we didn't want to rule the galaxy. We wanted to save it. And the only way to do that was to make sure that every species in it was capable of defending itself. And now the Devourers are returning. Our deep space monitoring stations detected their advanced scouts 3 months ago. The main battle fleet is approximately 2 weeks behind them. They're using the same approach pattern they used 3,000 years ago, which means they're expecting to find the same galaxy they left behind. Instead, they're going to find a galaxy that's been preparing for them for 2,000 years. Admiral Reeves smiled, and for the first time since entering the room, Kithara saw something that looked genuinely human. They have no idea what's waiting for them. What do you need from us? Cooperation, trust, and, most importantly, leadership. Marcus Chun returned his console and brought up a tactical display that showed the entire Zephyrian system. The Empire is the largest single political entity in the galaxy. If we can convince your mother to coordinate with the other major species, we can present a unified defense that the Devourers have never faced before. And if we refuse, then you'll face them alone, using tactics and technologies that proved ineffective 3,000 years ago, and you'll lose. Admiral Reeves's voice was gentle but implacable. Your Highness, this isn't a request for alliance. This is an offer of survival. Kithara stared at the tactical displays, trying to process everything she had learned. The humans weren't primitive. They weren't weak. They weren't insignificant. They were the secret guardians of galactic civilization, and they had been playing a game on a scale that made imperial politics look like children's squabbles. How many people know the truth about humanity? Outside our species? Perhaps a dozen individuals across the entire galaxy. Mostly intelligence officers who've noticed patterns they couldn't explain. Marcus Chun paused, studying her expression. Your Highness, we're telling you this because we need the Empire's cooperation, but also because we believe you can handle the truth. What makes you so sure? Because you figured out that we weren't what we appeared to be in less than 12 hours. Because you came here tonight instead of just reporting your suspicions to Imperial intelligence. And because despite everything you said to me this afternoon, you're pragmatic enough to work with people you don't like if it means saving your people. Kithara found herself thinking about her conversation with Marcus Chun in the throne room. His comment about humans remembering everything suddenly took on a very different meaning. When you said that humans never forget she said slowly. You weren't talking about holding grudges, were you? No, Your Highness. We were talking about learning from experience. Every encounter with other species, every diplomatic exchange, every conversation like the one we had this afternoon, we remember it all. We analyze it, we learn from it, and we use it to understand how to work with people when the time comes. You were studying me. We were trying to understand you. There's a difference. Marcus Chin's expression was serious, but not unkind. Your Highness, in approximately 60 hours, this system is going to be attacked by an enemy that has consumed entire civilizations. We need to know whether the most powerful single individual in the Zephyrian Empire is someone we can work with. And what's your assessment? That despite your arrogance, your cruelty, and your completely unjustified sense of superiority, you genuinely care about your people. And when you understand what's at stake, you'll do whatever it takes to protect them. Kithara was quiet for a long moment, staring at the tactical displays that showed Devourer's ships moving inexorably toward her home. When she spoke, her voice was calmer than she felt. What do you need me to do? Admiral Reeves and Marcus Chun exchanged glances, and she saw something pass between them that might have been relief. First, we need you to convince your mother to accept our help. The Empire's fleet is powerful, but it's not configured for the kind of warfare the Devourers practice. We'll need to make rapid modifications to your ships and defensive installations. Second, we need the Empire to contact the other major species and coordinate a unified response. The Devourers are expecting to face isolated civilizations that can be defeated one at a time. Instead, we're going to give them a galaxy that fights back as one. And third, Marcus Chun said quietly, we need you to prepare your people for the truth about humanity. Because once this battle begins, our cover will be blown permanently. The galaxy is going to learn that the primitive little species they've been looking down on for 3 centuries is actually the reason they're all still alive. Kithara stood, her royal composure returning despite everything that had happened. I'll need to speak with my mother immediately. Of course, we'll provide you with the technical specifications she'll need to understand the threat assessment. And Admiral Reeves? When this is over, when we've defeated the Devourers, what happens then? What happens when the galaxy learns the truth about humanity? Admiral Reeves smiled, and for the first time, it was the smile of someone who is genuinely looking forward to something. Your Highness, we've been pretending to be weak for 2,000 years. I think it's going to be very interesting to find out what the galaxy looks like when we don't have to pretend anymore. The Imperial War Room had been transformed into something unprecedented in the 8,000-year history of the Zephyrian Empire. Representatives from 17 different species stood around the massive holographic display table, their varied forms creating a scene that would have been impossible to imagine just 48 hours earlier. Crystalline Vorthan admirals stood beside chitinous Krelak commanders, while gaseous Etherian tacticians floated next to heavily armored Durakan generals. At the head of the table, Empress Valdris maintained her regal composure despite the chaos of the last 2 days. The revelation about humanity's true nature had shaken the very foundations of galactic politics, but she had adapted with the pragmatism that had kept the Empire stable for centuries. Beside her stood Princess Kithara, no longer the arrogant aristocrat who had mocked a human soldier 3 days earlier, but a military coordinator who had somehow become the primary liaison between the Empire and humanity's hidden fleet. Marcus Chun stood at the tactical display, his simple blue uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate military regalia surrounding him. But no one in the room was looking at his clothes. They were looking at the holographic projection he was manipulating, which showed real-time positions of Devourer forces moving through the outer system. Advanced scouts will reach the asteroid belt in approximately 4 hours, he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the room's translation systems. Main battle groups are 12 hours behind them. We're looking at a total force of approximately 800 bio ships, ranging from destroyer-class hunters to what our intelligence calls world eaters. World eaters. This came from Admiral Gorvok of the Durakan hegemony, whose species had earned their reputation through aggressive expansion and superior military technology. How large are these vessels? Marcus Chun adjusted the display, bringing up a schematic that made several of the assembled commanders step back in alarm. 15 kilometers long, 8 kilometers wide, with biomechanical armor that can regenerate from anything short of complete molecular disruption. They carry approximately 50,000 warrior organisms and have the capacity to strip mine a planet down to its core in less than 72 hours. That's impossible, declared General THYSS of the Vorthan Republic, her crystalline form resonating with skepticism. No biological organism could achieve that scale while maintaining structural integrity. The Devourers aren't entirely biological. Admiral Sarah Reeves interjected from her position at a secondary console. They're a hybrid of organic evolution and technological augmentation. Think of them as living ships with mechanical systems integrated at the cellular level. And you fought these things before? This question came from Empress Valdris herself, her tone carefully neutral despite the obvious implications. Our ancestors did, multiple times. Marcus Chun brought up a new display showing historical battle data. The last major engagement was approximately 1,800 years ago, when a Devourer exploration fleet attempted to probe the galactic core. We intercepted them at the Vale Nebula and eliminated the entire force. 1,800 years ago, Kithra repeated slowly. But, according to your cover story, humans only achieved interstellar travel 300 years ago. The humans you've been dealing with for the last 3 centuries are our colonist populations, Your Highness. Civilian settlements established to maintain our cover while the real military operated from hidden bases. Admiral Reeves activated another section of the display. Our primary fleet has been based in the Perseus Arm, in systems that your stellar cartography classifies as uninhabitable. The holographic projection shifted to show what appeared to be a massive fleet moving through space toward the Zephyrian system. The ships were unlike anything in the databases of any known species, sleek and predatory in a way that suggested they had been designed by people who understood warfare on an entirely different level. 93 ships, Admiral Reeves continued, including 12 dreadnoughts that incorporate technology we've been developing for the last 2 millennia. They should arrive approximately 6 hours after the Devourers enter the system. General Korvek of the Imperial Guard focused on the word with obvious concern. What variables might prevent their arrival? None, sir. I was being polite. Marcus Chen's slight smile carried an edge that made several of the assembled officers reassess their previous assumptions about human psychology. The real question is whether the combined fleet can hold the line long enough for our people to implement the final phase of the defense. What final phase? Empress Valdris leaned forward, her golden eyes reflecting the holographic light. Your Majesty, for the last 2,000 years, we've been preparing for this moment. Not just by developing military technology, but by establishing what we call the Nexus Protocol. Admiral Reeves gestured, and the display changed to show a complex network of connections linking hundreds of worlds across the galaxy. Every major defensive installation, every fleet base, every orbital platform in known space has been equipped with hidden communication and coordination systems. You've been installing backdoors in our military networks? Admiral Gorvok's voice carried the dangerous quiet that typically preceded Durakan declarations of war. We've been installing defense networks that your own systems couldn't detect, Marcus Chin corrected. Networks that we can activate in exactly this situation to coordinate a galaxy-wide defensive response. Without our knowledge or consent, General THYSS pointed out, her crystalline structure shifting to the deep blue that indicated Vorthan anger. Would you rather have your consent, or would you rather have a functional defense against an enemy that has consumed entire species? Kithra spoke for the first time in several minutes, her voice cutting through the rising tension. Because those appear to be our only options. The room fell silent. Despite everything that had happened, despite the revelations about human deception and the crisis that had brought them all together, this was the first time anyone had stated the situation with such brutal clarity. The princess is correct, Empress Valdris said finally. We can address questions of sovereignty and consent after we've survived the next 72 hours. She looked directly at Admiral Reeves. What do you need from us? Integration. Your fleets are powerful, but they're not coordinated with each other or with our systems. We need to establish unified command and control before the shooting starts. Unified under whose command? This came from Admiral Zephyr of the Centauri Federation, whose species had spent centuries maintaining their independence through careful political maneuvering. Yours, Marcus Chun answered simply. All of yours. The Nexus Protocol doesn't place human commanders in charge of alien fleets. It creates a coordination system that allows each species to fight according to their own doctrines while sharing intelligence and targeting data. And the human fleet will take point position against the primary Devourer battle groups. We have the most experience fighting them, and our ships are specifically designed for this kind of warfare. Admiral Reeves paused, then added quietly, we also have the highest probability of survival against their primary weapon systems. The implications of that statement settled over the room like cold fog. The humans were volunteering to face the most dangerous part of the coming battle, not because they had been assigned to do so, but because they were the only ones who might survive it. Very well. Empress Valdris stood, her crimson robes flowing around her like liquid fire. I hereby authorize full integration with the Nexus Protocol and place Imperial forces under unified coordination. Admiral Reeves, you have our complete cooperation. One by one, the other representatives voiced similar agreements. Some with enthusiasm, others with obvious reluctance, but all of them recognizing that personal pride was a luxury they couldn't afford. Nexus Protocol activation in 30 minutes, Admiral Reeves announced. Fleet integration will begin immediately thereafter. I recommend that all commanders return to their respective flagships and prepare their crews for combat operations unlike anything in their previous experience. As the assembled officers began to file out of the war room, Kithara found herself walking beside Marcus Chun toward the corridor that led to the palace's primary communications array. Sergeant, she said quietly, I owe you an apology. For what, Your Highness? For everything I said 3 days ago. For treating you and your people as insignificant. For my arrogance and stupidity. Marcus Chun was quiet for several steps. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than accusatory. Your Highness, you reacted exactly as we expected you to react. You're not the first person to underestimate humanity, and you won't be the last. Does it bother you? Spending centuries being looked down upon by species you could have conquered easily. No more than it bothers a parent to be underestimated by a child. They had reached the communications array, where technicians were making final adjustments to equipment that looked nothing like standard Imperial technology. Your Highness, we never saw other species as inferior. We saw them as unprepared. And now, Marcus Chun moved to one of the control stations and began entering commands that activated systems hidden throughout the Zephyrian fleet. Now we find out whether 2,000 years of preparation was enough. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity that transformed the Imperial Palace into the nerve center of the largest military operation in galactic history. Communications flowed between hundreds of worlds as the Nexus Protocol came online, linking fleets and defensive installations across known space into a single, coordinated defense network. Kithara found herself serving as a liaison between human technicians and Imperial officers, translating not just languages but entirely different approaches to military thinking. The humans fought with a precision and coordination that seemed almost mechanical, while the various alien species brought their own unique capabilities and perspectives to the emerging battle plan. Princess, Admiral Reeves called from the primary command station. We're getting first contact reports from the outer sensor networks. The holographic display shifted to show the edge of the Zephyrian system, where the first Devourer scout ships were emerging from hyperspace. They looked exactly as the human archives had described them, organic monstrosities that seemed to grow rather than fly through space, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with alien energies. 12 scout ships, Marcus Chin reported. They're conducting standard reconnaissance sweeps, mapping our defensive positions. Are they detecting the hidden fleet? Negative. Stealth systems are holding perfectly. He paused, listening to something coming through his earpiece. Human fleet reports ready for engagement. All alien forces report green status across the board. Kithara watched the display as more contact icons began to appear at the system's edge. The main Devourer battle fleet was arriving exactly as the humans had predicted, their massive bioships moving in formations that suggested thousands of years of predatory evolution. 800 ships, Admiral Reeves announced grimly, including 6 World Eaters and approximately 300 Destroyer-class hunters. Can we stop them? Your Highness, in about 20 minutes, we're going to find out whether the last 2 millennia of human planning was sufficient. Marcus Chun looked up from his console, and for the first time since she had known him, Kithara could see uncertainty in his eyes. But I want you to know that regardless of what happens today, working with your people has been an honor. Sergeant Chun, Kithara said formally, when this battle is over, you and your people will never have to pretend to be less than you are. Not with us, and not with anyone else. Marcus Chun smiled, and this time it was the smile of someone who had just received a gift he hadn't expected. Thank you, Your Highness. That means more than you know. The communications array chimed with incoming priority signals from across the galaxy. Fleet commanders reported ready status from the Andromedan Republic, the Vegan Alliance, the Outer Rim Coalition, and dozens of other political entities that had never before cooperated on anything. All stations report ready, Admiral Reeves announced. Nexus Protocol is fully operational. We have unified command and control across 437 worlds and approximately 12,000 ships. Devourer main battle line is entering optimal engagement range. Marcus Chun added, human fleet is moving to intercept. All allied forces prepare for combat operations. Kithara found herself holding her breath as the display showed the human ships emerging from their concealment and accelerating toward the approaching Devourer fleet. They looked impossibly small compared to the biomechanical leviathans they were approaching, but there was something about their movement that suggested absolute confidence. This is Admiral Chun of the Terran Defense Corps. To all allied forces came a voice over the communication system. Today, the galaxy fights as one. Today, we show the universe that some things are worth defending. Today, we remind the Devourers why they retreated into the void the first time. The first weapons exchange lit up the darkness between the planets like a new star being born. And in that moment, Princess Kithara understood that she was witnessing the birth of something unprecedented, a galaxy that had finally learned to fight back. The battle raged for 18 hours. Princess Kithara had never seen warfare on such a scale, and she hoped she never would again. The holographic displays in the Imperial War Room showed a 3-dimensional chess game played with fleets the size of cities, where each move could determine the fate of entire worlds. The Devourers fought with a savage hunger that defied conventional military doctrine, their bioships regenerating damage that should have been fatal while spawning smaller attack craft like living ammunition. But the galaxy fought back with a coordination that the Devourers had never encountered before. When Zephyrian heavy cruisers exhausted their primary weapons, Durakan destroyers moved in to provide covering fire. When Vorthan crystal ships overheated their energy systems, Krelak biovessels absorbed the excess heat and redirected it into their own weapons. And through it all, the Nexus Protocol coordinated everything with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. The humans fought like people who had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. Their ships moved through the battlefield with absolute purpose, striking at critical points in Devourer formations before disappearing back into the chaos. They didn't try to match the bio ships in raw firepower. Instead, they used tactics that had been refined over 2 millennia of planning, turning the Devourer's own aggressive instincts against them. Devourer command ship taking damage. Marcus Chun reported from his position at the tactical display. Primary consciousness cluster appears to be destabilizing. Casualties? Empress Valdris had remained in the war room throughout the battle, coordinating Imperial forces while watching her daughter work seamlessly with human commanders. Light across the board. The coordination protocols are keeping our losses to minimum levels. Admiral Reeves looked up from her console, her expression cautiously optimistic. I think we're actually winning this. The statement proved premature. As the primary Devourer command ship began to fail, the remaining bio ships underwent a transformation that sent new alarms echoing through the war room. Their organic hulls began to pulse with energy patterns that didn't match anything in the human databases. What are they doing? Kithara asked, watching as the Devourer fleet began to reshape itself into formations that looked more like living organisms than military units. Something we didn't expect, Marcus Chun admitted, his voice tight with concern. They're going into what our archives call a consumption frenzy. Individual ship consciousness is being subsumed into a collective entity. What does that mean for us? It means they've stopped thinking like a military force and started thinking like a single, very large predator. Admiral Reeves was working frantically at her station, sending new commands through the Nexus protocol. All ships, all fleets, implement emergency dispersal pattern 7. Do not allow Devourer forces to achieve mass concentration. But the warning came too late. The Devourer bioships had already begun to merge, their organic hulls flowing together into structures that defied physics and sanity. Within minutes, what had been 800 separate vessels had become fewer than 50 massive entities, each one the size of a small moon, and radiating energy patterns that made nearby space itself seem to writhe. Energy readings are off the scale, one of the human technicians announced. They're drawing power directly from hyperspace somehow. Can our weapons affect them in this configuration? Unknown. This is beyond anything in our historical records. Kithara found herself thinking about Marcus Chen's words from their first meeting. We remember everything. If humanity's vast archives and 2 millennia of preparation weren't enough to handle this situation, then perhaps it was time for other approaches. Admiral Reeves, she said suddenly, you mentioned that the Devourers are part biological, part technological. What happens if you disrupt the technological components? In theory, the biological parts would lose coordination and revert to basic survival instincts. But we've never found a way to selectively target their tech without destroying the ships entirely. What if you didn't need to target it selectively? Kithara moved to the tactical display, studying the merged Devourer entities that were now advancing toward the inner system. What if you could create a system-wide electromagnetic pulse that would disable all technologies simultaneously, including our own ships and orbital platforms? Marcus Chin pointed out. We'd be defenseless. No, we'd be reduced to basic capabilities, but so would they. And basic capabilities favor numbers, not individual ship size. Admiral Reeves looked up from her console, her expression thoughtful. It's possible, but it would require coordinating the self-destruct sequences of approximately 40 fusion reactors simultaneously. The energy release would have to be precisely timed to create a standing wave effect across the entire system. Can it be done? Theoretically, but it would mean sacrificing our primary orbital installations and accepting that any ships caught in the pulse would be dead in space until their systems could be manually restarted. Empress Valdris had been listening to the exchange with growing interest. How long would it take to restart our systems? For Imperial forces? Approximately 6 hours, if the crews know what they're doing. For the human fleet, probably half that. And for the Devourers? Unknown. But if our theory is correct, their biological components would revert to individual ship consciousness, which means they'd have to relearn how to coordinate as separate entities. Kithara looked around the war room at the assembled commanders who were still coordinating with their respective fleets. We need to put it to a vote. Every species, every fleet commander. If we do this, we're betting the survival of galactic civilization on a theory. Your Highness, Marcus Chun said quietly, sometimes that's what leadership means. The vote was closer than Kithara had expected. The Durakans and Krelax supported the plan immediately, their warrior cultures comfortable with high-risk tactics. The Vorthans and Etherians required extensive technical discussions before agreeing. Several of the smaller species voted against it entirely, preferring to continue conventional warfare despite the deteriorating tactical situation. In the end, the decision came down to a single voice. Empress Valdris, whose authority as host of the Unified Command gave her the power to break ties. We implement the pulse, she announced, her voice carrying across the communication channels to every ship in the Allied fleet. All vessels, prepare for emergency shutdown. All crews, prepare for manual restart procedures. The next 10 minutes were the longest in Princess Kithara's life. She watched as fusion reactors across the system began synchronized overload procedures, their energy outputs climbing toward levels that would either save galactic civilization or destroy it. The merged Devourer entities continued their advance toward the inner planets, apparently unaware of what was about to happen. Pulse initiation in 30 seconds, Admiral Reeves announced. All personnel, secure for electromagnetic surge. 20 seconds. 10 seconds. Pulse initiating now. The The war room's holographic displays died instantly, plunging the chamber into emergency lighting. Outside the palace windows, every light on the planet flickered and went out simultaneously. In space, the combined fleets of 800 species went dark as their power systems were overwhelmed by an electromagnetic pulse that registered on sensors halfway across the galaxy. And in the outer system, 50 moon-sized devourer entities suddenly found their technological components completely non-functional. The silence that followed was absolute. No communications, no sensor readings, no way to know whether the desperate gambit had succeeded or simply doomed them all to face the enemy defenseless. It lasted for exactly 6 minutes and 37 seconds. When the first backup systems came online, they revealed a battlefield that had been transformed beyond recognition. The massive merged devourer entities had broken apart into thousands of smaller bioships, each one apparently confused and operating independently. They were attacking each other as often as they were attacking allied vessels, their coordinated intelligence reduced to primitive survival instincts. "It worked," Admiral Reeves whispered, staring at the readings from newly restored sensors. The technological components were the binding agent that held their collective consciousness together. "Fleet status report," Empress Valdris commanded, her voice cutting through the amazed silence. One by one, the reports came in. Human ships were coming back online rapidly, their crews implementing restart procedures with efficiency that spoke of extensive training. Imperial vessels were taking longer, but their heavier construction had protected them from the worst effects of the pulse. Across the system, dozens of different species were discovering that they had survived a gamble that should have been impossible. "Devourer forces are in complete disarray," Marcus Chen reported as the tactical displays flickered back to life. "Individual bioships are reverting to basic feeding behaviors. They're consuming each other. How long do we have before they reorganize? Based on historical patterns? Several hours at minimum. Possibly days. Time enough to finish this," Admiral Reeves said grimly. "All fleets begin systematic elimination of disorganized devourer units. Priority targets are any vessels showing signs of attempting to re-establish coordination." The battle that followed was unlike anything in the historical records of warfare. Instead of massive fleet engagements, it became a careful harvest of confused and isolated bioships that could no longer coordinate their defenses or regenerate their damage effectively. The same coordination protocols that had allowed the galaxy to defend itself now enabled a systematic elimination of an enemy that had once consumed entire civilizations. By the time the twin suns of Zephyros Prime set on the second day of battle, the last Devourer bioship had been destroyed or driven back into the void between galaxies. The immediate threat was over, but everyone involved understood that the galaxy had been changed in ways that would take decades to fully comprehend. 3 weeks later, Princess Kithara stood in the same crystalline chamber where she had first encountered Marcus Chun, but everything about the room felt different now. The intimidating architecture seemed quaint rather than impressive, and the carefully calculated grandeur felt like theater designed for children. Marcus Chun stood before her again, but this time he wasn't wearing the simple dress uniform of a diplomatic escort. Instead, he wore the star-heavy insignia of what the galaxy was learning to call the Terran Strategic Command, with rank markings that indicated authority over military operations across multiple star systems. "The integration process is proceeding smoothly," he reported, though the formal tone seemed almost absurd given everything they had been through together. 17 species have requested permanent liaison officers with human tactical commands. 23 others have asked for access to advanced defensive technologies.